Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. Hi, and welcome back to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kelly Livingston, and today's episode is a really special one, and I'm going to hold this very close to my heart as we meet today with Dr. Eugene Zampieron. I'm so honored to be joined by him. We always referred to him as Dr. Z in school, and Dr. Z is a naturopathic physician, master herbalist, ethnobotanist, international teacher, author, and founder of Eco Tours for Cures, a powerful program that brings patients and people into direct relationship with the healing plants and traditional medicine in Jamaica. He was also one of the founders of the University of Bridgeport College of Naturopathic Medicine, where I had the privilege of working with Dr. Z for 2 years in clinical rotations and being taught by him for 4 years. I'm going to share in just a minute some of the old notes I have, which is so fun for me. He's also currently serving on the CNME, the Council for Naturopathic Medical Education. So welcome, Dr. Z. I'm so happy that you're here today.
Thanks, Kelly. I can't wait to talk to you and talk about naturopathic medicine, something that's very dear to my heart. And of course, the foundation of that is our herbs. So really excited.
Yeah, awesome. So some of our listeners who've been following along have definitely heard in some episodes about the naturopathic principles and the therapeutic order. I've even had an episode where I've introduced the concept of vitalism. So before we jump into all of the history of natural medicine and herbs, and definitely get to touch on Jamaica and all of the trips that you've taken there, I would love to hear from you how you would maybe define vitalism versus mechanism and how that plays into essentially the history of natural medicine and where those have diverged.
Sure. Well, it goes way back when doctors felt that they were more than humans were more than just mechanical beings, that we had a spirit. They defined it as the manatu or prana in the ancient things, or chi or ki, the vital force in homeopathy. So there's many aspects to that, but the key to that is it's an organizing, intelligent force that has power, which we call the vis, the power. And whether it's the power of your body, which is nature, that's why we get the idea of the healing power of nature, vis medicatrix naturae, that the body has the inherent ability to heal itself and fight disease. And it's our job in natural medicine to stimulate that process through age-old ways of getting the bodies to move and get unstuck. So that's kind of the vis. But this was an argument amongst doctors for a very long time, thousands of years, where some thought that the body was more mechanistic. It was like if you look at all the parts and you know the parts, then you know the whole. The vitalists said, no, you don't. 1 + 1 = 5, not 1 + 1 = 2. There was a synergy and an additive effect of understanding a human system or a natural system like that. And then, there's many other things like the absence of health is disease and the absence of disease is health and vice versa. And no, health is more than that. Health is a complex interplay of your thoughts. I mean, Buddha said you become what you think about all day long. So that's kind of one of the foundational aspects, when a patient comes in, what are they thinking about? What's their mind like? That was very important. And that kind of is sort of like looking at treating the whole person. When we look at treating the whole person, we realize that people are part of clans and families. And, and when we look, and illness affects the whole organism, and it affects the whole family, and it affects the whole, sometimes generation. It's generational. And so in holistic medicine, we have to be treat any imbalance in this mind, body, and spirit and understand how that affects the whole organism, the whole person. So this was highly debated over many, many millennia. Some of the Greeks felt, no, we're just basically like a big clock, and you get Newtonian physics versus Einsteinian physics. And so naturopathic physicians are more like we're a Einsteinian body with energy, and we have to unblock the energy. If energy is blocked in the body, you can't have good health. If we're not absorbing our, we have these 6 principles, but we have all these amazing proverbs or aphorisms of natural health that many people thought of. I was just one of the first ones to write them down on one piece of paper. I spent a long time trying to find all kinds of sayings that have been around for a long time that impact on medicine, like chewing your food. If you look at Dr. Fletcher, he was a naturopath way back when, in the 1800s, and he cured so many people's diseases just by having them chew their food.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how could that be? Well, what's the key to chewing? Well, it's basically getting all the nutrients from your food. And he felt that one of the big genesis of diseases was not absorbing things. So to a physician, to like an allopathic or mechanistic physician, that sounds ridiculous. How could you cure depression by chewing your food? Well, if you think about it, if depression has to do with amino acids in your brain and your whole body, and amino acids are the foundations of neurochemicals, and you're not absorbing those amino acids because you're eating your food like a Hoover vacuum instead of Fletcherizing it, like Dr. Fletcher said, then of course over time you might become deficient in those nutrients, which are going to impact your chemistry. So we look at it as like a whole domino effect of health versus just, you're sick, you come to the office, we fix you, you come into the office only when you're sick. That's another big thing with the vitalist versus mechanists. Vitalists mean that, you have to periodically go to the doctor and work on trying to maintain health. It's a
Absolutely.
maintenance.
Work on that foundation of that therapeutic order, right? And stimulate the healing.
Yes, and periodically you should touch base.
Absolutely.
Touch base with the doctor, and it's not like go only when you're broken down. Go to stay in good shape. And that's a big issue with the way modern medicine is, and insurance-based medicine and things like that, where you almost have to like, go in when you're broken down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like some of those systemic issues become almost part of the obstacle to cure for some people too, and their access to, this way of thinking or type of medicine. It's also very different in how we look at, symptom suppression versus symptoms are your body communicating with you. And although there might be some palliation as we're working with patients on root causes, we don't want to turn off our body's ability to communicate and talk to us. It's telling us something really important. So I think that's a big take home too.
Another thing is in vitalism is like in homeopathy, what's so interesting is that the illnesses are described by the medicines they cure.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a fever, you can have a gelsemium fever. Gelsemium's a remedy, it's a plant, jasmine, right? Or you can have a belladonna fever or flu, or you can have a eupatorium flu, which is
Mm-hmm.
bone set, where you have pain so deep in your bones that everything hurts. I mean, gelsemium is that you're dull, dreary, dull,
Drowsy,
drowsy,
droopy.
droopy. I forgot droopy. It's like it's like the dwarfs in
In
Snow
Snow
White.
White. We
Anyway, so
actually, my daughter and I just watched that. So,
oh, that's great.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so you actually choose different remedies based on the person's individual experience of the illness. They may have all the same virus but the way they respond to that morbific agent, they call it, this invading agent, is so unique. That's what has to be respected in vitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Mechanism, they all get Tylenol, they all get a vaccine, they all get,
Mm-hmm.
whatever, the same algorithmic, uh, treatment. And yeah, so that's another big difference between vitalism and mechanism. Also, true prevention, like, prevention versus early detection is huge. I was just talking about that with a colleague of mine, and we use breast cancer as an example. To a naturopathic physician, if you have breast cancer in your family, or you're a woman in menarche, you're starting your menses, your mother has it, your sister, your aunts and whatnot, well, you can get a yearly mammogram, and that's important. It certainly is part of medicine, but that's more early detection. True prevention would be like, okay, how could we turn on and off genes with diet or phytomedicine? How could we get that liver so that the woman makes friendly estrogen byproducts versus unfriendly carcinogenic estrogens? How could we get the plastics and all the estrogen disruptors out of her diet? How could we change the microbiome, which is like a huge bio kind of chamber for,
We've had
you know,
episodes on it. So, anyone
you
listening
did
is
for
good. Yeah.
detoxifying. This is all this
We've
is all
talked about
part
the
of vitalism.
estrobolome and beta glucuronidase. So,
Oh
they
wow,
can
you
go
got really
back. We got into it. Yeah.
yeah, and that is starting to percolate into conventional thinking with, Harvard having even a department of microbiome research now. But yeah, back when I was studying, if you gave yogurt or probiotics to people or asked to do a stool analysis on someone as part of your regular maintenance of medicine, the doctors are like, why are you checking the person's gut flora? They're coming in for a routine thing. Well, we were trained that it's the foundation of thinking. And we were right. That's the whole thing. We were right. We were totally correct about all that stuff. Even though they didn't have the science back then, the vitalists were correct.
Absolutely.
I see it all the time.
Yeah, I say to patients very often that I'm kind of lucky in that I graduated from school in 2013. And if you look at the research on the microbiome, it's pretty much exploded since then. So it's easy for me to say to a patient, oh, here, you're going to go home with a poop test for your depression, right? They kind of understand it now. And we talk a lot about the gut brain axis. And there are those scientific studies that have caught up. But to your point, the 4 or 5 hour protocol is what we were taught in school. And you didn't necessarily need to look at a poop test to know that patient might need to clean out some morbid matter, right? So it's definitely,
Yeah, and it's changed. Even the sophistication of understanding the microbiome has really changed
it's so
tremendously.
exciting.
So we're kind of at a cool level of understanding, but it many times it proves the old aphorisms, those old vitalistic aphorisms, like what Fletcher said about chewing your food.
Yeah.
or, don't wait until you're sick to get, healthy. Or, if diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. And if diet is correct, medicine is of no need. That's from the Charaka Samhita, one of the most ancient Ayurvedic books.
Yeah, and one of your classics that I mention to patients is always the ages age you. Or
Yeah, that's interesting because the ages stand for advanced glycosylated end products.
Mhm.
And we never realized in diabetes and sugar dysfunction how toxic sugar could be. It could become what they call a glycotoxin. And sugar, you know that because when you spill some honey or maple syrup, I was just giving some of my maple syrup that I made February when we tapped the trees here
Nice.
in Connecticut to our friends from San Diego who came to visit for my daughter's wedding, which was recently. And I had spilled some maple syrup, and man, it just leaves a mess. It just sticks and it's like crazy glue. Well, that happens in your body if you have abnormal sugar metabolism, and it actually changes the structure of things. The enzymes don't work, the cells don't work. It becomes a poison. And that's why we know now that, a subset of dementia is diabetes type 3. Some people have, bad glycation. They call it glycation is how our body works with sugar and things like that. But it virtually glues, it actually vulcanizes the body. It turns the body into rubber. Many years ago, I remember taking my kids to see the body exhibit where they had taken humans and they had either a horizontal or sagittal plane and they actually fixed their tissue. Well, they basically turned all their protein into rubber through a chemical process. Well, that's what sugar does. Sugar turns our cells into rubber. And so that's why we look at chromium and vanadium and trace minerals and how our body handles sugar and insulin. So yeah, that's a good aphorism, I think.
Yeah.
And it does age you because your tissues get old when that happens.
And then you need more antioxidants to balance that all out.
Yes, absolutely.
So
The, the, the,
I was sharing with you before we hit record that I actually have notes back from the history of naturopathic medicine courses that we
cool.
took with you. I have phytopharmacognosy. I have this awesome still spiral bound note section. And so I know I'm not going to go through all of these and share them with my listeners, but I'd love if you can even kind of go back to the beginning and walk us through some of the earliest traditions of herbalism and ancient cultures and give a little more detail on maybe how those systems viewed the body and the role that they've played in our medicine that we utilize today. And then maybe we can move on to maybe some women's health and herbalism in women's health and the role that that's played and why that's not the standard of care in America anymore, for example.
Well, if you go way back to interesting time, prehistoric times, many organisms use what's called instinctual dowsing to figure out what. Actually, I was just out with my dog, and he was eating grass. He has an upset stomach, right? And to induce vomiting. So, and how do they know that? Who taught the animal that? So, instinctual dowsing is probably this innate connection that organisms have with the universe and the natural environment. And humans somehow lost that. So the humans probably watched animals and emulated them. They watched what plants they were using, and they most likely learned about herbalism that way. There was a big movement towards that, instinctual dowsing, because you wonder how did humanity know what plants to use over many, many, many thousands of years, right? So then, of course, trial and error played a big role, I'm sure. You watched who ate what, and if you were an elder, trust the elders. If you were an elder and they were still alive to say, don't eat that scarlet colored plant because scarlet is this thing that plants use to warn you that there's danger. Oh, okay, like the scarlet streak in a phytolacca plant or poke plant. When it goes from green, which means you can eat the phytolacca, to scarlet, the warning sign in Mother Nature. Things that are many times scarlet, they warn. Just like animals get these colors, these snakes get these colors, and don't eat me, I'll poison you, right? Well, that's probably one. Then there was shamanic travel, which is where you would go to a medicine person and they would help you by you sometimes using entheogens or prayer or meditation or drumming or some ceremony to tap into that divine and try to understand. Maybe you would go back and talk to the ancestors and they would straighten you out, like what happens with Iboga. Or maybe you would just have a profound connection with the spirit world. And sometimes the shamans would say, yeah, that's the right plant. It came to me in a dream,
And then you have doctrine of signatures too, right? For some of our knowledge gathering.
Another big one, which is like plants look like what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, I remember when you taught us that. I was like, this is so cool. Like, walnuts look like the brain.
Yeah. There's a great book called The Complete Herbal that talks about hundreds and hundreds of doctrines of signatures. If you can find that on Amazon somewhere as a little paperback.
I also happen to have your book right here, which we'll have to put in the show notes. I've had this one for a long time, but I have many copies I've given away throughout the years. So you guys will have to check this out. The Natural Medicine Chest. It's a really, really good one. I always have in my office for
hopefully
patients.
You can find one. It's kind of out of print. But
oh, no. They have to come borrow it from me.
So then, you go back to ancient Chinese culture and shamanism with Emperor Shennong in 2737 BC. And he divined a lot of herbs and was able to put like ginseng and ephedra and dongguai and a lot of these herbs kind of on the planet. And he sort of had 365 herbs for the 365 days. And then he discovered acupuncture. He was they called him the divine husbandman because he was very much into farming and farming practices. So we learned a lot of that. But his work is so old, it's still shrouded in mystery. You're talking, 5,000 years old. But it was really the Yellow Emperor who wrote the Neijing in 200 BC that really kind of codified traditional Chinese medicine as a real powerful and distinct thing. And the good thing about the Chinese, unlike many cultures that might be more ancient to them, maybe the Atlanteans or cultures in Africa, the Dogon people, that they didn't write things down, or maybe it was destroyed in some great cataclysm. But we have extant records of the Chinese and the Assyrians and the Babylonians writing these things down. We have clay tablets to see these things, medical documents written about 2600 BC with the joy plant, the opium poppy there, and many plants, licorice root, plants that we use all the time on clay tablets that are in museums now. So we know that they use these things like that. The Code of Hammurabi talks about herbs like henbane, which is sort of one of the datura herbs. It's an powerful entheogen and used for pain. Poppy is medicine, and the Sumerian Empire. So the Middle East was a huge area of herbal medicine that still we see. And they had huge gardens that time. Then you move to Egypt and you have Imhotep, right? And the various Ebers, the Ebers papyrus, which has about almost 1,000 recipes that doctors used, herbal recipes they used, and they use garlic and fenugreek and boswellia and poppy and licorice and
That's one of the
So many
things I
other.
love about herbal medicine so much, that you can look back and throughout all of the history of mankind, we've used these herbal allies. It's just such a powerful, wonderful
Yeah, the
medicine.
Bible. Oh, the Bible and Ayurveda has examples, like I mentioned, the Sharika Samhita and the various books of Ayurveda. What was nice about Ayurveda is they developed a system of medicine, of how to live, how to understand your
Mhm.
constitution, which is another aspect of vitalism, that everyone shouldn't be doing the same thing. Everyone shouldn't be eating the same food or doing the same type of exercise. It's highly individualized based on your constitution or your what they call your dosha.
And it takes into account so much more energy medicine, essentially, right? Like our body is energy. And when you are working holistically on mind, body, and spirit, yes, you need to work on the body. We talk all the time in the podcast and with my patients on, yes, we're working on the body. We might be removing physical obstacles to cure. But then, as you mentioned earlier, we're also working on the mind. We're working on the spiritual body. We're working on the energetic body. We're moving communication between and throughout the body. So there's so much to removing that stagnation of energy. I think that other systems of medicine used much more than conventional medicine in the United States of America, for sure. I'm sure you've gotten this question before, and I hear from patients all the time. Well, why don't we practice this medicine? Why don't more people know about this? How come no one's ever tested my poop before, told me about homeopathy? So maybe you can walk us through a little bit of the history of those turning points in this country. For example, the Flexner Report and the AMA, and maybe go back to some of the eclectics. I think that you definitely taught me not necessarily just to use eclectic medicine, but how eclectic my practice can be, because when you're working with individual patients that have many different root causes and concerns, having different modalities and tools that you can utilize is just such a wonderful offering to their health journey. So there's probably a lot we can touch on there. But yeah, why is this not how medicine is in this country anymore?
Well, there was a great schism in thought. Again, the vitalist versus the mechanist, and there were a lot of doctors that they call themselves reformed allopathic doctors. A little later on in history, after the Greeks and the Romans and things like that, was Galen, and then eventually Paracelsus came in the 1500s, who sort of used a lot of harsh minerals and a lot of different treatments like that for people, and lots of suppression of other thoughts of healing. Like the vitalists went underground with the wise weed woman movement.
Mm-hmm.
And they were persecuted and I'm sure executed because they were. I mean, there was a book called The Malleus, which was a book written how to identify a witch and how to kill them. It was just awful. So it was like a genocide against vitalism people.
Mm-hmm.
So you and I would be, I'd be a warlock, you'd be a witch, and
Oh,
we'd
yeah.
be, somebody would get us. Unless we kept to ourselves and, kept it underground, and that's what happened. So these vitalistic systems, but eventually medical doctors, dealt with it and they wanted to use herbs, like Worcester Beach in the late 1700s. He was critical of the harsh botanicals and the leeching, and where they killed George Washington this way. He was like leeched, he was bloodlet too much. He was critical of these things, and he wanted to move more to herbology. So he created this reformed medical system, and that was kind of the first where he incorporated Native American things that he learned about in the colonies here, and that was the first break of thought, things like that. And so the reformed doctors became the physiomedicalists and the eclectics,
Mm-hmm.
who again were medical doctors because naturopaths didn't exist back then yet, but they were ones that worked with vitalism. And then there were, of course, the hydropaths. Russell Trall was a hydropathic medical doctor, and he had a big school and clinic in New Jersey, right? talking like late 1800s. And then you had the homeopaths who were also medical doctors,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you had the eclectics, the physiomedicalists who were like, they were different from the eclectics in that they didn't want to use toxic botanicals. So there was even a little bit of a schism in botanical medicine. They wouldn't use belladonna. They'd use something more, which is deadly nightshade, right? They would use something more gentle. And so eventually the American Medical Association was founded to try to bring together these kind of renegade medical doctors and bring them all into one. And the AMA was actually founded against the American Homeopathic Association because the homeopaths were having great success treating cholera and yellow fever and many different plagues. They'd actually published their results in the paper, how many people lived using their methods versus the allopaths who had dreadful, and so many allopaths were switching and becoming homeopaths. So they founded the American Homeopathic Association. Eventually, the AMA was formed, and they wanted to emulate German scientific medicine. Medical schools back then were mostly apprentice-based, and you would study with a doctor for 7 years and then become a physician or a surgeon or barber, surgeon, yank out teeth and give them a shave. And if they didn't pay their bill, you'd be a Sweeney Todd. No, just joking. But nonetheless, that's kind of how medicine was, a hodgepodge of many different things. So the AMA is like, okay, let's bring all these medical sects together, right? The medical sects, they call them. And so once doctors joined the AMA, they were, and I'm going to use a Star Trek analogy, my nerdy Star Trek. In Star Trek, there was a group called the Borg who would come and they would assimilate a culture and then destroy them. And that's what they did.
Mm-hmm.
The homeopathic medical doctors, their schools ceased to exist. The herbal medical doctors, the hydropathic medical doctors, the other medical doctors that believed in the physiomedicalists, until there was only one type of medical doctor, and that was the Germanic, drug-orientated, make your medicines out of Rockefeller petrochemical doctor.
Very opposite of turn on the body's natural healing process.
Yes,
right.
Absolutely. And what sprung up are these medical irregulars. So you and I we went from being a witch and warlock to an irregular. I guess that's better.
I'm cool with it.
And so then so what they did is you mentioned Flexner. So part of that process of assimilation and annihilation was through medical schools and medical education.
Mm-hmm.
And loans for students. And I know if I couldn't get loans for medical school, I wouldn't have been able to become a naturopathic doctor.
I still owe them. I understand.
So yeah, you'll have a fun day when you have a burning party when you burn your last loan payment.
One day.
Not one day, it'll happen. But yeah, that's what kind of happened. So they went around and they judged the schools. And if you were a medical school teaching anything besides this Germanic scientific methodology, any vitalism, you didn't get loans. If you didn't get loans, the students could not attend the school. You lost your accreditation. It's kind of unfortunately what's happening today. I don't want to get into politics, like Peter Tosh says. You're making reference, but students have to feel comfortable going to school and have to get their loans and whatnot in order to go to school. And if you hit them at an educational level like that, then the students dry up, and then the schools dry up, and then the profession dries up. And then what happened is they had started attacking the naturopaths. So they put out this Flexner report in 1910 that said if you were training, well, that didn't really affect the naturopaths. They was still targeting the medical doctors at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, the naturopaths came along and they just started going after them because the AMA and the Journal of the American Medical Association under this guy Morris Fishbein was very, very powerful, and they used basically yellow journalism to make it seem like you were crazy going to a
quack.
alternative practitioner. And yeah, they came up with the word quack, which was really, quack originally comes from doctors who used mercury.
Mm.
They were quacks. It wasn't holistic doctors. It was they used quacksilver, which was mercury. So it was really aimed at the Paracelsians who used mercury. But anyway, that's a kind of very condensed version of kind of where we are. It took a long time for luminaries like Dr. Bastyr, I saw you had the book there, who kept naturopathic medicine alive in the only bastion of holistic thinking, which was the Pacific Northwest, the wild Northwest, because he was from Seattle, originally from Minnesota, and he moved out to Seattle. And back in Seattle, they had hospitals that you could become an admitting physician, even if you were a naturopath, if you were an osteopath, if you were a chiropractor, if you were a medical doctor. Very open. It was called Grace Hospital. And we don't see that anymore, unfortunately. We don't see like naturopathic hospitals. There were many naturopathic hospitals at the turn of the last century in the 1900s. Actually, the Battle Creek Sanitarium in Battle Creek, Michigan, run by Kellogg, was bigger than Yale.
Wow.
Bigger than Yale. And I know Dr. Rob Kochko and Dr. Brody did their history presentation on that, and they found amazing pictures of the Battle Creek Sanitarium. They had, huge solariums for people who could go and heal.
So cool.
And Kellogg was a very interesting, he was a medical doctor, but he was very holistic gastroenterologist. He was a 7-day Adventist, believed in healthy food. So our medicine kind of dovetailed with the 7-day Adventists, who seem to be one of the blue zone people in the world, where they live the longest in America, some of them there. So it's associated with health, diet, longevity. So we're doing something right if these are considered the blue zones of America.
Yeah, I was going to say it has a trickle down effect, right? If the knowledge around taking care of your body is suppressed and practitioners aren't taught that, then of course they're not teaching their patients anymore. And so you do get patients in our offices now who have no idea how to take care of their body or their mind or their spirit, right? No, it's not something that they've been taught how to do. And so it does seem, amazing when they come to a practitioner like you or I, and they're being looked at holistically, but they're also being taught, we call them the seeds of health at Roots Deep Medicine, but they're being taught how to take care of themselves and their families.
Like you should do a sauna.
Mm-hmm.
You should fast.
Mm-hmm.
I've
been using fasting a lot more therapeutically. I think I did in the beginning of my practice, and whatever, you evolve and change and, use different tools. And I've been using it even more most recently with such great results. It's such a profound therapy for the right patient. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very important to get rid of take the garbage out of our bodies, and periodically do that. And even though it seems like an old, outdated concept, there's a lot of research on fasting, putting autoimmune disease. I mean, my main book is on arthritis, and my main clinical focus is rheumatology. So I've done a lot of work with autoimmune disease and rheumatology. And
that's what I've been using it for most recently, and always thinking about you. Yep.
Yeah, there's a plethora of research talking about fasting and the immune system. Actually, when a person's not responding to even natural medicines and even allopathic medicines, we don't really have a choice. And again, going back to instinctual dowsing, not only do dogs and animals eat certain plants and vomit and do whatever they do, but they also fast a lot when
Mhm.
they're sick.
They give their body the time to heal.
Yeah. So there's clearly something to that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm thinking of one particular patient who exactly had been on medication for years and, done all the steroids, all the things, and this was a really, really profound tool for them. And they were out of pain very quickly, and so they bought in, and so now it's become part of their regular kind of healing routine that we do every once in a while.
There's a British study that shows that fasting is equal to 20 milligrams of prednisone
You taught me
as
that.
far as its as far as its efficacy. And of course, that was an older study. Now there's quite a bit more on fasting and getting rid of a lot of the various chemicals. We call them xeno for the Greek foreign word, biotic. Xenobiotic chemicals. And so getting some of those chemicals have been shown to induce autoimmune disease, whether it's plastics or volatile organic compounds or heavy metals like mercury. These have been proven to cause autoimmune disease. I have lots of studies and presentations that I've done internationally on these types of things, trained many doctors over the years. You got to get them out of the body. And so in allopathic medicine, there's no discipline that specializes in detoxification and mercury. When you say you do detox, you get people calling you that, are either on opioids or alcohol, and that's their version of detoxification. That's why I try to use the word depuration. Depuration is really what I think was coined by, I don't know who coined it, but I know Dr. Crinian, one of my teachers, and Dr. Serafina Corsello, she was an Italian trained physician who developed what's called the loading theory. And it's the idea of she and Dr. Bill Ray Dr. Ray had a whole hospital in Texas. I don't know if he still runs it, but for very sick, environmentally sick people. And you'd go there and you'd, get fast IVs, get out of the environment. They had like no carpets in the place, and the place was not painted with VOC paints, and people would go and they would detoxify, particularly patients that were the canary in the coal mine type of reactive patients. They had no hope, and these environmental doctors helped them.
Yeah.
So there's a big, big move in our medicine to study environmental medicine like that.
Yeah, I just did an episode on drainage remedies and biotherapeutic drainage, talking about the emunctories and
Oh, good.
Because sometimes when a patient first comes in, they're not pooping, they're not hydrated, they're not moving their body. And I was talking about it, how you're kind of like shaking a bottle out to clean it out, but then there's so much more that can be done, extracellular matrix work and emotional healing, right? There's so many layers that as you're releasing and draining, or not necessarily detoxing, but
would you take your bath mats and rugs and shake them inside the house? Or would you bring them out, shake them?
Right.
And they're like, I would take them outside the house, doctors. I said, well, that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. A lot of it is common sense.
You wouldn't resuspend all that dust and dog hair and whatever's in the bath mat into your home. If you have mold, you would want to get a dehumidifier and keep that humidity low to keep the mold counts down, because of course mold-based illness is a huge thing now too.
Yeah.
So yeah, our job is to really get rid of the toxins, and we do that with herbs, and we do it with homeopathy, and we do it with nature cure. There's many modalities to help with these natural balancing processes.
Hydrotherapy.
And everyone resonates a little differently to the modality.
Absolutely. It's why it's such a unique, individualized medicine. I love that aspect of it. So despite all of this suppression and, it's we're not being given loans if we're studying this medicine, all the reasons why maybe it should have or could have gone away, it's still here. I'm as passionate as ever. I graduated in 2013. You're still here, thankfully, teaching us all, which again, I'm so very grateful for. But tell us a little bit more about some of the rebirth and maybe just a little bit about your founding of UB. I think that to me, that personally is really dear to my heart. Of course, it's where I was trained, and just some of your perspective on, how is this still alive other than the fact that it works, right? Why and how is this medicine still alive, and how can we continue to keep it thriving for any other, maybe clinicians listening? What can they do to pay this forward and spread this knowledge more?
Well, I mean, there was a time when there was only like one naturopathic school. They were closing in the 1940s and around World War II because antibiotics became supreme, vaccines, and modern medicine was really powerful. I mean, you can't deny that the founding of many medications really revolutionized certain parts of health. Not the more chronic disease, but certainly the acute things that were killing off a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But then eventually the chronic diseases started creeping up, and we started getting more cancers, more degenerative disease, more chronic illnesses, which weren't really being helped by conventional medicine and conventional diet wisdom and, avoiding fats, avoiding carbs, avoiding sugar, what's the right diet, eating processed foods. All that kind of was post World War II. We thought that everything would be changed with modern medicine and it would lead to health and wellness in our country. And that just didn't happen. So there became a counterculture movement, which came in and had a resurgence of natural medicine. And it's interesting, like I always would talk to Dr. Bastier and Dr. Farnsworth, who was one of the founders of the school out in Oregon, which kind of kept natural medicine alive for a while until other schools could be formed in the 50s. And he would say, "Oh, the naturopathic medicine were turned into a bunch of hippies because these guys weren't these old timers. They weren't hippies. They were very kind of whatever." But that's where the nexus came from. I forget the name of the magazine that we used to watch, Prevention Magazine, and there was a couple yoga. The yoga magazine started advertising, East West. There was a magazine called East West back in the days, right, when I was younger. And so people started showing up at the door again. Hey, I'm interested in this, kind of natural medicine. Yeah, they were more granola kind of oriented folks, but so what? And so that kind of rebirth. And then I came a little bit later when Bastyr College was founded, which was right then there was only one college in Oregon, the National College of Naturopathic Medicine. I went to Bastyr, which was founded by Dr. Pizzorno and Dr. Bill Mitchell, my teacher, one of the luminaries of natural medicine, Dr. Les Griffith, and and they tapped into an amazing bunch of teachers from the Pacific Northwest that were practicing naturopathic doctors.
They had that
But the
knowledge.
East Coast, yeah, they had their knowledge of that whole Northwest kind of um, vibe there. Now I heard about it.
But you were from the East Coast. You were from Long
I
Island.
was from the East Coast, and I had a personal conversion to natural medicine through many things that happened in my life. But the main thing was that I was cured by a Jamaican bush doctor, Jamba of the Maroons,
Who I had the privilege of
for
meeting
yeah,
with
you did
you.
before
Yeah.
he crossed over.
Yeah.
And he's a powerful luminary. He showed up in images and pictures and fires, and he's such an expansive being. By the way, they just made a documentary on my life, so maybe you could post that. It's called Eco Tours
Yes.
for Cures Retrospective Journey. It's on YouTube.
Okay,
So
absolutely.
I'll send you the link. People can watch that, but it's a whole documentary about how I got this start in Jamaica and eventually founded the University of Bridgeport. So I was a marine biologist down in Jamaica studying, doing some, independent research and Jamba took me into the forest, and actually it was Jamba's teacher mostly. Jamba was there too, and made me a herbal decoction. Now, I didn't really know much about herbs then. I was a marine biologist, but I was very impressed that this tea that I drank for a couple of days just totally cured my belly. I probably picked up a parasite of some sort.
Mm.
It was when Imodium was considered a prescription. And I was like, this guy knew more about medicine than any doctor I ever knew.
Yeah.
And he would go out into his backyard and pick the forest herbs and make them into a tea. Now, little did I didn't know about the field of ethnobotany back then, and how many drugs were discovered, and how there were many luminary ethnobotanists that went into the Amazon and worked with the native people and came back and discovered many different illness, like Dr. Richard Evans Schultes, who wrote the book Plants of the Gods. And many drugs were discovered that way
I have
by
that book somewhere
people
up there.
going into the forest, working with people. You have that book. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And that's how drugs were discovered. So I had a personal conversion. I left marine science. My advisor said, you could get your PhD in marine science and teach, or you can follow this holistic medicine. Because I was trying to find a program. I always kind of wanted to be a doctor, but I kind of had a like marine science too. But this rebirthed this whole healing in me, and I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to be like just a doctor. I want to teach people about herbs.
Mm-hmm.
My father's Italian, and I grew up with a big garden and the fig trees and all these other things like that. So I had this deep kind of my great grandmother was a folk healer. So I found
You
that
had it in you.
through serendipity, I found out about this Bastyr College. And Kelly, I still don't know how it happened. There was no internet back then. There was no Google. There was nothing. I actually had to go on microfilm and in the library and research it myself. And I took a chance and I went out, go west, young man.
It was meant to be. I think a lot of
And so
NDs
when I
have
came
that.
back to practice, I started practicing and I said, we need a school on the East Coast. And that's where I connected with Dr. Jim Sensenig, the late Dr. Jim Sensenig, and Dr. Pram Vishwanath, and Dr. Zali, the late Dr. Zali, who was the dean of the chiropractic school at University of Bridgeport. And Connecticut had this thing in its law saying that we really had to get a naturopathic school in order to keep the law. I don't really know how true that was, but we were like, okay, let's form a school. So it was, slow going at the beginning, and the school was ready to go underwater. And then I came in because I was on the advisory board, and then I helped build the clinic and get the education going. And then I got roped into teaching, first part-time, then full-time.
I was very lucky to I had you for a clinic rotation for 2 years. And every time
Yeah.
we would fill out, who do you want to be on rotation with? I was always Dr. Z.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it became sort of like I always say it was like the blood, sweat, and tears of and I, ran the garden and taught botanical medicine. So it became like what the Rastas say, it's a livity. It's like you live it.
Mm-hmm.
You live like you can't live allopathic medicine,
Yeah.
but you live naturopathic medicine.
Mm-hmm.
It's a livity. So that's what the Rastas taught me. And I started to take people back to Jamaica. Once I got my degree, I approached Jamba and he took me on as an apprentice. And that's what the documentary is all about. And me and Dr. Kamai, we started this group called Eco Tours for Cures.
Yeah.
And we started bringing people back. Originally, it was my family and friends, and they just loved Jamaica, this area of Jamaica so much that they said, wow, you should like bring your students here. They would love this experience. This is like how you really learn medicine by experience it at that roots level, really roots level, with the people who just walk outside and they have the creator's drugstore out there.
Yeah. And you really are learning how to live the medicine. You're practicing nature cure
It's
every
a
day.
livity,
Yeah.
like the Rastas say, it's a livity.
I love that.
So yeah, and that's kind of how it started. So then that's how I, dragged you down there, although I didn't have to twist many arms.
It was not difficult.
And you guys certainly enjoyed it. I think it really, travel is always the best teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think it changed a lot of people's lives. It changed my life going to Jamaica. See, I originally went to Jamaica as a high school student.
Okay.
That was my first time I was down there, and I kind of would go down there, and I didn't meet John until a little later on, and then you know, but it changed my life because I really wanted to teach people about herbal medicine. Naturopathic medicine kind of came sort of as an afterthought because that was the only medicine really, besides being a doctor of Chinese medicine, where herbs were actually taught at a professional level. You're board certified. You actually, in other words, in your board exams, you take very high level questions and certification in herbal medicine. Eventually, I became an herbalist at the American Herbalist Guild because I felt like I needed to really even learn more about herbs.
There's always more to learn, right?
Oh, pretty much most of those books are on herbs. Maybe a few homeopathic books and other books thrown in, but yeah. So that's kind of my story. And then, I taught at UB for a long time until I retired, and then the program closed. Unfortunately, there was all kinds of political and other events that kind of happened. But now I'm involved still with the profession and trying to keep the other schools healthy. There's a nice school in Puerto Rico that's fantastic that I'll be teaching at
wow.
least doing some herbal medicine training there, probably online.
Yeah.
But maybe get a chance to go down there and take them through El Yunque, which is the rainforest there.
Yeah.
They were concerned. They were like, "Well, we learn all these Western herbs, but we don't even learn about our own herbs in Puerto Rico."
But that's one of the cool things about herbalism is as you learn the constituents and you learn the actions of the herbs and how to basically, make an herbal tincture and all of that knowledge is going to be applicable anywhere you are and anywhere you can take it anywhere with
Any
you.
culture you go, you can always visit the local herbalist, which is what I do.
And but if you communicate too in the Latin names, and you're gonna have a whole language to use that.
Absolutely, everyone. There are herbalists all over the world that you can, if people are listening out there, when you travel, you could always visit a botanical gardens or some natural sanctuary. It doesn't have to be a fancy botanical garden, and just kind of learn about what the local people use for medicine.
Yeah, because the point is all of those kind of external tools whether it's herbs or water or sunlight, we're using all of that to turn on our inner healing. And we carry that with us wherever we go. So it's a combination of the inner vis, right? And that vital force, and then knowing how to utilize nature's tools to turn that on, and create the conditions for health. So I love that.
Well, the herbs have a spirit. They're living organisms, and whether they heal you through that level of changing or building your spirit up, or some type of a vibrational sort of physics where they're kind of harmonizing particles or waves, or is it the phytochemistry? Of course, teaching phytochemistry for many years, I became really super knowledgeable in the constituents and can talk through the chemistry backwards and forwards, but it's just not that.
Yeah.
When the shaman says, well, if I pick this in the morning and pull the bark down, it helps with diarrhea. And if I pull the bark up and collect the same thing at night, and it helps with vomiting, and then you check the chemistry and he or she is right, and the chemistry sort of changes, how in the world? It's just, That's where the chemistry goes out the window and we bring in the spirit again.
Back to the energy, right? Yeah, because as
Yeah.
Lindlar said, health is a harmonious vibration, right? And respecting essentially nature's laws. And if one of those laws is you pull the bark up for vomiting, then that's imprinting that energy in the healing process. I
You
love
have to
that.
respect that. Some scientists, they just are like so steeped in the scientific methodology, they kind of blow off the ethnobotany of the people and okay, let's just take it back to the lab and look at the
Yeah,
chemistry. But I think the way that the herbs are prepared and used and the ceremony that's involved is very critical and does change the vibration of the patient, the shaman, and the remedy. So it's all
absolutely.
about vibration. I mean, um, whether you hear the beat of the drum, which is a vibration, or you drink a tea, which is a vibration, or you take a homeopathic remedy, or you stick a needle down in the toe and it affects this part of your body way over here, which has nothing to do with your toe. That's vibration.
Yeah.
It's energy. So yeah, I think that's kind of where we're moving into way more energy medicine. I mean, we use energy medicine to diagnose ourselves, you know, MRIs and,
Hmm.
ultrasounds and all kinds of things like that. Why can't it be used for healing? I mean, it kind of is. We do ultrasound on people, we do something, but we got to use those other powerful, subtle energies, you
Hmm.
know, the energy of prayer, the energy of meditation, the energy of ceremony, the drumming. That's why I'm a drummer,
Hmm.
you know. I've been a drummer for my whole life, but I was actually in a band for many years. We unfortunately broke up during COVID, but drumming has always been, I mean, we've had amazing drum circles in Jamaica, drumming with the Rastafarian and Maroon people and bringing so much powerful energy to that one spot. That's got to be a sacred spot, I'm sure. The
Oh, for
point,
sure.
we
The
call it the
point.
point.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, if listeners want to learn more, I will absolutely post the documentary that you mentioned, and then
Thank you.
just tell us how we can find Eco Tours for Cures. I think that's even the website name.
It is.
What's the
It
best way
is.
that they could get involved in that if they're interested?
Yeah, well, it's a great travel experience, whether you're a photographer, you don't have to be a doctor or a
Right.
naturopath. You just have to be interested in a natural back to earth. We call it an education vacation.
Hmm.
It could be we've had photographers, we've had massage therapists, we've had people that are just interested in hiking and nature, or we had a geologist come with us that was really interested in the rock formations as we hike along a part of Jamaica that has been unspoiled. It was probably very similar to the Jamaica that when Columbus came to Jamaica. Unfortunately, through his things, but it's probably like the Jamaica of the Caribs and Tainos and the Arawak Indians that live there. So this part of Jamaica is like where the highway actually goes inward and doesn't follow, because most of Jamaica, the outskirts, the whole 360 periphery is all built up tourists with beach resorts and things like that. But this is like a 50-mile stretch of Jamaica that's wild and untamed and beautiful. I mean, there's other places, I'm sure, up in the mountains, but it's very unusual to get a coastal area of Jamaica that's wild and untamed
Yeah.
and
It's so
not a tourist.
beautiful. Yeah.
So this is why we chose this area. I was chosen by the creator to go here and teach, I'm sure. And Jumbo was involved with that whole experience. So I like bringing this people to Jamaica, this area.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful area that we go to. It's a place that we go called Strawberry Fields. And it's a place to get in touch with yourself too. So not only do we do a lot of herbal stuff there, because the people, that's what they do. They're herbalists, but we enjoy the great food there and the beautiful weather. We usually go in March. I'm not sure if the dates are up there yet because we're trying to organize the dates with some of the other naturopathic schools and when their spring breaks occur. So it's a bit of bit of chess, but
Yeah, I know a lot of students went, I think, last year, right? Didn't you guys have a lot of students from Bastyr, maybe it was even? I
yes,
remember
nice group
Lindsay,
of people.
Dr. Lindsay
And
telling me
other
about that.
students came and other people came too.
That's so amazing.
But yeah, if you like photography or herbal medicine, or you just want a nice vacation away from the tourist traps, it's certainly something to think about. So you can get more information at Eco Tours for Cures. We have a Facebook. I think it's Eco Tours for Cures Jamaica. Great
Okay.
video by our buddy Lindsay, who put a lot of work into putting up a lot of videos and content
I'm
into
going to drag
there.
her on the podcast too.
Oh man, I tell you, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, so before we end, I know that we touched on a lot of aspects of naturopathic medicine, mind, body, spirit healing, herbalism. If someone is listening and they're really intrigued about getting started in this field, what's the one best piece of advice you could give them? Of maybe it's an inner question they have to ask themselves, or maybe it's get to know about this modality. What's kind of the first step that someone that this just sparked curiosity in could take or should take?
In studying to be a naturopathic
Maybe
physician
both. Yeah, let's do it
or
for
herbalist.
anyone listening who's a practitioner who
Oh,
yeah, is kind of motivated by this conversation, but then also listeners who are patients who this sparks something and wow, I need to look into this natural healing a little bit more. What are some of the best steps they could take?
well, certainly contact and try to see a naturopathic physician to experience the medicine. I think would be very critical.
Yeah.
Um, if you're a patient, um, kind of gather your records and let a naturopathic doctor or physician look at it. With telehealth now, you could at least speak to someone. It's a lot easier than it used to be.
Mhm.
So let them look at your health through a different lens,
Mhm.
through measure we measure the determinants of health. That's one thing that's so interesting. Um, we use the tools of functional medicine, which was coined by Dr. Bland, to look at how organs function. Like, for instance, you can go to your medical doctor and get your general wellness panel, right? Your comprehensive wellness panel, and they look at your liver enzymes. And if they're not high, usually the doctor says your liver's great. But a functional doctor will actually look to see how well your liver is versus is it diseased? So is it diseased or is it well? I'll often send some hair to the lab and we look to see, because I always ask patients when I start a talk, one of the first questions I say is, how many people know how much lead's in their body?
Mhm.
Everyone looks around and they're like, no one knows. I said, I do. These are determinants of health. The labs exist for you to know these important benchmarks of your health. It's more than just your blood sugar and your white blood cells look good and your liver looks okay and your kidneys look okay. And then they look at your cholesterol and whatever those numbers. I could talk hours on that. Just
I
that
have a whole
the
episode
problem.
on what
The
labs to run
problem.
in perimenopause. And it
Yeah,
was a two-part because one was how to look more in depth through conventional labs that you can go to Quest and run. And I even like linked them how to do them very cheaply on their own if they wanted. And then there was one on
right.
more functional, kind of more in-depth labs. Like,
Good. So you're doing that. But yeah, well, take advantage of those labs because they're kind of determinants of your health.
yeah,
We have very advanced hormone panels now that can really tell you why you're feeling crummy.
yeah.
Maybe you can't sleep. and you've tried everything under the sun. So when you've tried everything under the sun, reach out to a naturopathic physician. Maybe he or she could help you, or they could help you with understanding why you're not feeling well. And I think that's so critical. I mean, years ago, like we had to take a course called Physician Heal Thyself. I didn't know that I was poisoned with lead when I got into naturopathic school, because to make money to get into school, I was a house painter
I
the year
remember the
before I went
story.
to
Yeah.
school. Yeah, and I was sandblasting houses. I actually sandblasted a very famous house that was part of the Culper spy ring that allowed us to win the Revolutionary War.
Wow.
So I painted this old house from the Revolutionary time. Little did I know that I got poisoned with lead. And when I first started naturopathic school, I don't know, I couldn't think straight. Something was wrong. I was a straight A valedictorian. I think I was like fourth in my high school and very high level in college, straight A's. And here I had to take a graduate course, and my mind wasn't working too well. The naturopathic doctor right away asked me, what was I doing? What did I do for a living? What was I exposed to? And through taking samples of my nails
Mm-hmm.
and my hair, determined that I had been exposed to lead. And I went on a very incredible depuration program. So I lived the medicine I was
Yeah.
exposed to. It totally allowed me to think, because lead is very dangerous for your mind. We have so much dementia that's happening in Alzheimer's. And I'm not saying that lead causes all dementia. It's not, but it's one of many factors that, like Dr. Bredesen, who's a kind of a holistically oriented medical doctor, is saying is your cognoscopy, which is like we get a colonoscopy, he says, but you should get a cognoscopy. So these tests to see how your mind's working. Well, all that came from naturopathic medicine, all the stuff he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's just repackaging it, and it's great. I'm glad he's doing his work and doing actually a really good published study. But it's all based on the medicine from the ancients kind of coming and bringing it forward so that we could understand it with a modern label. So that's what I'm saying, is that,
Yeah.
we're not doing anything that's really super new. It's just that we're kind of applying the model to maybe new situations, an old model.
Yeah.
And that's and to become a doctor that knows about these types of things is powerful. You're not going to get this training in medical school. That's why I decided, I kind of had an opportunity to get into medical school and other programs. I had very good grades and I was going, but I really didn't have a super interest in allopathic medicine after that thing that happened to me
Yeah.
in Jamaica. So if you're interested in herbs and how to use them on people properly and understand the spirit and the chemistry and other things, if you want to learn about nutrition, if you want to learn about hydrotherapy, Chinese medicine, then naturopathic medicine is the place to go. And you
Yeah, we're
want
not biased or anything. But I
I mean, you
agree.
could, you could do it the other way. You could go to medicine, become a medical doctor,
I
and
don't
then
know
have to
though.
add all the extra training of
Who's
a
teaching you all the
naturopath to do
philosophy
that.
then though? I
But
don't know.
that's a hard journey. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most medical doctors that are holistic that I talk about, they had some type of a personal healing crisis of their own, and that's why they turned to a holistic bent. It wasn't that they wanted to study this from the get-go, but if you want to study it from the get-go, naturopathic medicine is definitely where you'll get a fantastic education and a license to practice and help so many people with the scourges of diseases. The symptoms
Modern
are not the
life, yeah.
disease, like you said, they're the warning of a imbalance, and you learn that in naturopathic medicine, I think, way more than in conventional medicine.
Well, I also think and this kind of goes back to the philosophy too. When we're sitting with a patient, we're working through things in an order, right? With our philosophical tenets, right? First, do no harm, and all of these things. I think I talk about this in another episode where they influence every decision I
Treat the
make.
cause. Now everyone,
Right.
the big word is root cause medicine, which I think is kind of another naturopathic aphorism, kind of borrowed and re-wallpapered.
But it's not, I call
great.
it, don't practice plug and play medicine. Like, just, oh, your iron's low,
Plug
take
and-
iron, or just run this functional lab. It's not, there's so much more to it, right? And hopefully we conveyed some of that with this
And
conversation.
always ending cold.
Yes.
Start in your shower. Be a naturopath. Start in your shower.
Yep.
Hot water, cold. Do your feet if you can't stand. Do a full immersion cold shower. But I'm telling you, when you start doing hydrotherapy on your own, whether you're a lay person that doesn't want to become a doctor, or you go to the sauna and then you do a cold plunge or something like that, that's very powerful. And that's a powerful experiential thing that will build health in you. Research shows it's very important for the brain and the body to do that type of medicine, to get in the sauna. So it's simple things like that, simple.
And it can be
decisions.
overwhelming at first, right? If patients haven't learned how to take care of their body. So I do think it is beneficial to work with someone who can prioritize and say, okay, we're going to utilize this hydrotherapy for this reason to help with your vital force. And then we're going to move on to, maybe herbal infusions or whatever tool it might be, homeopathy. But there's so many layers and aspects to the healing process that I do think it can be helpful to have a practitioner like you or I to guide the process. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. This was awesome. And as I said, I will link in the show notes for listeners to be able to find you. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful day and they take home some of the pearls that you shared and practice some nature cure at home today.
Stay healthy.
Stay healthy. All right. That was so wonderful to have Dr. Z here with us today. And he and I just realized before he parted that we forgot to mention his podcast, which is The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z. So you can find that on podcast platforms. And I'll also put that in the show notes. I highly recommend that you at least check out some of Dr. Z's books or even interviews. He's been on the radio forever, for many, many years. We were just talking about how he started on radio with a reggae show, and then Natural Health Alternatives was a show that he did as well. So he is a wealth of knowledge. I am so honored to have had him on the show, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Have a great day.